This is The Close-Up, conversations about creativity, made possible by Barco. From our studios in Los Angeles, here is Jim Chabin.
Director Celine Tricart is with us. She's an award-winning filmmaker and stereographer who has worked on countless broadcast, documentaries, and feature films, including Stalingrad and Transformers. She has also served as a VR supervisor for Sony Pictures Entertainment. She divides her time between Paris and Los Angeles. Welcome, Celine.
Thank you.
You've been around some really great directors. What do the great directors you worked with, what do they have in common?
You know, I think it's a vision and leadership. So if you have a vision, you don't have leadership, usually things collapse and somebody else take over. I've seen that happen in quite a lot of projects. When you only have leadership but no vision, then you make your movies, but are those movies going to be successful? Maybe not. So it's a combination of both those.
When you put a crew together, what qualities do you look for when you're directing something for the crews that you want to have on your team?
You know, your crew is like your family. That's why it takes, you know, usually you take the same people over and over again. So I'm looking for people I can trust. Of course, people who know what they're doing and are talented, but it's more about the human connection. More recently, I realized that, like a lot of other people in Hollywood, I was also biased in the way I was hiring people around me. So now I'm really trying to make a point of having a diverse crew. Every time I have the power to recommend people or hire people, I always make sure it's always diverse. It's a range of human beings.
What do diverse teams bring to a production that delivers award-winning content?
Well, a movie is a point of view, right? And as a director, you know that you can't make a movie alone. You need, you know, it takes a village, and you need all those people around you who will bring their own vision, their own background. And if it's all the same background and all the same vision, the movie will be only one-sided. And when you have people around you that have different backgrounds, different vision, different sensibilities, then they will make the final project just richer and more compelling for everyone.
When you're working on a film in Russia like Stalingrad and you're working with a Russian crew, and then you come back and work on Transformers with an American crew, are they different? Do they approach movie making differently in different cultures?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually also worked in China, a Chinese movie. I was a stereographer of a martial art movie in China. And so it's fascinating for me to see how the people work and how different it is. Oh yeah, I mean, it would take forever to describe the differences, but definitely between the French filmmaking style, the Russian, the Chinese, and American, it's all very different. So it takes some time to get adjusted to the new rules, and I just find it fascinating and very, it makes me a better, I think, filmmaker, knowing all those different techniques and mixing them together.
A colleague of ours in Tokyo with Panasonic said, whether it's 3D or new cameras, it seems as if new technology is invented in Asia. Americans learn how to make money with it, and the Europeans know how to turn it into art. What is it about so many of our annual winners here at our Society Awards, at the Academy Awards, are European? What is the filmmaking culture like in Europe that brings out such artistic end results?
You know, what's fascinating for me coming from Europe, working in Hollywood, is that it brings balance to my filmmaking style, because I come from a place where cinema is an art, like you say. It's not an industry. It's almost insulting if you say things like, oh, I'm gonna make money with it. And, you know, and it's very hard to make money in Europe, but fortunately, you often can get financing from the government itself. You know, the main source of income, of financing for movies in France is the CNC, the government-backed Center of Cinematography. In the US, it's completely different. So it's more about, you need to have a return on investment at some point. You need to make your investor maybe not wealthier, but at least they need to get their money back, you know. And so it's a whole different way of looking at filmmaking and cinema. And I think it's interesting what you're saying about the awards winner, because when you're from Europe, but you live in America, you bring this artistic side to things to America, but at the same time you're trying to make profitable movies. So it's an interesting balance between the two.
Is making a movie more difficult today than it was 5 or 10 years ago?
I think so, yes. And I have only 10 years of experience in the film industry, so I don't have a lot of, I don't know how it was technically 10 years ago. I was fresh out of film school. But I feel like it's way more difficult, especially in Europe, where because of the financial crisis, it's harder to get money from the government. And in the US, there is the movies, this little industries that was between the 5 million and the 50 millions dollar budget just disappeared. Like now we make very big budget or extremely small budgets, and it's painful because I thought this little gap now has extended so much, and those were the great movies that I loved.
How do you feel about virtual reality, 360, and all of this new technology?
My background is in like normal traditional filmmaking flatties, and then I became a stereographer, specialist of 3D, and now VR for me is the next frontier. It's the next logical step in our never-ending quest for more immersion and realism. That's what we want to do when we make movies, right? We want to make people, transport those people, our audience, into the world of our movies and just make them dream for a few hours. And VR has a tremendous power when it comes to that, especially. There is two different types of VR, live action VR, which you shoot with a camera, and game engine-based VR that you build in a game engine. And I'm trying to explore the in-between when we can bring live action into game engine. And I think that's where you can really strike a chord with the audience of full immersion, compelling storytelling. So I'm very excited. I've been doing VR for 2 years now, and I'm in love with it.
What does VR do as a filmmaker for you that traditional 2D or 3D platforms just technically could not deliver?
Well, it's hard for me to compare traditional filmmaking with VR. I think it's two very separate things, and one is not better than the other. If I would compare VR to something else, I would compare to maybe immersive theater. So where you take people, you bring into a space and things unravel around them. So in traditional filmmaking, you sit down in front of a screen or in front of a TV and you watch incredible stories within the limits of a rectangle, right? More or less wide, whatever, 3D, 2D. VR, this distance doesn't exist, and you feel it's very funny to see people wearing VR headset for the first time and they go, oh, wow, and it's this sense of wonderment, and suddenly there is no distance anymore.
You're working with Maria Bello on a movie about women fighting ISIS, and I recently called you and you were just returning from Iraq. Tell us about that.
So Maria came to me about 6 months ago. She was looking for a DP, a woman DP, which is very rare in those days, but specifically a woman DP to go in Iraq to interview the women who survived ISIS and are fighting against it. And I cannot describe how I felt when I got this phone call. I immediately called my parents, and because they are travelers, they've been in the Middle East, so I wanted to get their opinion. And I was crying in my car. I was like, I need to go. I need to go. This is the story I've been waiting for. This is exactly what I'm here to do, is to tell the story of those incredible women, so brave, taking arms and fighting against ISIS, And going to Iraq, I cannot describe how scared I was. When the plane was landing, I have tears in my eyes right now. When the plane was landing, what am I doing here? This is ridiculous. I'm taking too much risk. And we shot for 1 week. We had to go all the way to the border with Syria. It was so scary every time we had to pass checkpoints. And I would go back tomorrow. I've met the most incredible women in the world. They are so inspiring. They're just
What are these women doing?
They trained to, so they were positioned at they were stationed at the border between Iraq and Syria, which is, highly dangerous because ISIS is retreating from Mosul and they're going back to Syria. So that's that's what they do, and they are trained in, in like shooting, and every morning they have a very physical training and they just stand guard. And it's funny because this little village where they're stationed was almost empty when they arrived. And now that they're here, like people trust them, and so the villagers, the people, are start coming back to this village.
Not humanity. Until I die, I will not take off this uniform. I promise on Singar soil, I promise to liberate the prisoners from the hands of our enemies. I promise all martyrs, mothers, and sisters. I kiss the martyrs' mothers' hands. Until I die, this uniform will be on me. Until Kurdistan tells me to take off this uniform, I will wear it and protect their honor and dignity.
What do you hope the VR experience will do for this very powerful group of women?
The reason why I'm very excited to shoot this project in VR specifically is because it was so scary and it took so long to get there that with VR you can put a headset and you can have the same incredible experience of meeting face to face with this woman and almost talking to them while not being in danger or going that far. So that's why this project had to be in VR, just so you can feel right there, look at those women in the eyes and understand their fight.
You were involved in a project with Luke Wilson and his brother, Andrew, that was a commercial for Shinola. It was quite successful. It won our best commercial of the year. How did you approach, with Luke Wilson and Andrew, how did you approach doing a commercial in VR?
Yeah, it was interesting. That was a very interesting shoot because I got there to Detroit, and then I realized that neither Luke or Andrew have ever seen VR. So the first thing I did, like I said, put a headset on Andrew's face and we watched a bunch of VR. And he was blown away. He was like, oh, I like that piece specifically. I was like, you know what? Okay, great. I know what you want now. As a DP, I know which direction we're going. And so we decided to do an anti-commercial with more Luke Wilson. It was a lot of improv. We would go to different rooms and say, Andrew would go. It was a work in progress between Luke and Andrew, going, oh, this room is interesting in VR. Let's have this funny thing happening here. So, and apart from Luke, who is an incredible comedian and improv artist, all the other people to see are people from the factory, are real people reacting to whatever Luke was doing in a very natural way. So I think that was the key of the success of the piece, was the freshness of things being improvised and feeling natural.
Oh, hi. Luke Wilson here. I'm on top of the Shinola factory in Detroit.
Get up, get up. Get up, get up, stand up. Get up, get up. Get up, get up, stand up. Get up, get up.
What do you want to reach with presence, and how do you get at that?
Present is like the Holy Grail in VR. When I describe what VR can bring to the table, to your stories, why do a VR film specifically, I always say there's 3 different steps. Step number 1 is immersion. Immersion is the low-hanging fruit. Immersion is being surrounded by a 360 environment and sound. Awesome. The next step, which is more complicated to achieve, is the sense of presence. The sense of presence is you believe, you have an environment, you're surrounded by an environment, you believe, the next step is you believe you're actually in this environment. Your brain just clicks and thinks that you're there. And of course you know it's VR. You have a big headset, you're sweating in there, you know you're in VR, but on the subconscious level, your brain doesn't, and that's the sense of presence. And the top of the pyramid, very hard to achieve, is embodiment. And embodiment is presence on a physical level. You can almost feel, if your avatar is hurt in VR, you will almost feel the pain. That actually happened to me a couple of times. It's mostly for game engine, because to achieve embodiment, you need to be able to move in the space freely. But it's doable. So presence is definitely the thing to try to target, especially when you're doing live action.
I was shown The Walk, which is a piece that Create Advertising did for the movie, Bob Zemeckis' movie last year. And it's the story of the French acrobat who walked between the two twin towers in the 1990s on a cable. And they put the headset on me and they said, okay, now you're standing and you look down, you can see the taxi cabs 100 floors below you, and you can hear the taxi cabs, and they turn a fan on so the wind is blowing, and they say, step out on the cable. I wouldn't step out on the cable. And they said, don't worry, 30% of the people refuse to step out on that cable because it's too real.
Yeah.
Is that, you say it's the Holy Grail. Are we going to get there faster because ultimately that's what really makes VR different from everything else?
You know, it's interesting because the two ends of the spectrum here are filmmaking, which is a passive experience where you do not belong in the story, you're watching the story, and gaming, which is first-person shooter, you have agency, you decide what the conclusion of the story will be. My instinct is that the sweet spot, the Holy Grail of VR, is somewhere in between the two, where you belong in the story, you have a certain degree of agency, but you're still being told a story. I like storytelling. So you can find, it's like a choose your own adventure book. You know, you find your own journey through the story, but you will reach the conclusion that I, as a storyteller, want you to reach, because that's the moral of the story. That's what you're going to learn from the journey. But The Walk is interesting. It's more on the game side of the spectrum because there is no story per se, but it's incredible. I was working for Sony at the time, and I was giving demos of The Walk. I was not involved in making the experience, but I saw maybe 100 people going through the experience, and yeah, there's a lot of people who cannot take a step. That's fascinating to me.
Name 2 or 3 VR experiences for those who are watching this and want to get a sense of what you consider quality. What would you recommend that they look for and watch in order to learn a little bit more?
The problem is that there is different types of content if you have a headset or if you don't have a headset.
Right.
If you have a headset, I would say the Felix and Paul Studio content it's always very high quality and absolutely beautiful. It's in 3D, so that's why you need a headset.
Right.
But if you go look for, Box of Curios or the Cirque du Soleil film, Box of Curios or KA, that's very high quality, amazing VR content. Now, if you have only your smartphone or a laptop, I guess you can go on, Jaunt, for example, has a platform you can access, so it's a JAUNT, that has a lot of very high quality content as well. You can really scroll around on your laptop.
And someone who enjoys the movies, name 2 or 3 of your favorite 3D movies.
Gravity, number 1. For sure, that really blew my mind. Beautiful use of 3D. The director is a huge 3D fan as well, so he knew how to use it. Hugo, that was one of the, in the early days, early days of 3D, beautiful. Martin Scorsese, the stereographer was Demetrio Portelli. By the way, I think he won the Creative Award for that movie, if I remember well. So, and finally, T.S. Pivot, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, which is one of the rare examples of indie movies shot in 3D. Fortunately, didn't get a wide release, but a beautiful movie.
And available on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Are you hoping that 2 years from now, you say in the early days of VR, 2015, where do you think we are in 2020?
The early days of VR.
Yeah.
It's okay, 2020. Well, I think hopefully by then we'll have cracked the code of how to bring live action into game engine. So that can be a combination of photogrammetry, volumetric capture, maybe the light field technology will be widely available by then.
The headsets may be wireless.
Yeah, that would be nice.
The resolution on the screens in the headsets may be higher.
The headset right now, the limiting factor, right? All cameras can do 12Ks if they have to, you know. But at the end of the day, you have to work with those headsets with a very low resolution and not any standard for color, which as DP is very painful because you don't know how it's going to look on the HTC, on the Oculus, on the Samsung Gear. So hopefully better headsets. But as I say, no matter how good the technology gets, it's first and foremost the storytelling. So I'm really hoping we're going to get great storytellers involved.
What are your thoughts about where we'll see augmented reality?
Augmented reality is very exciting. I was lucky to be selected to do a HoloLens hackathon a year ago. So I developed a little app with a team for the HoloLens. It was absolutely mind-blowing. They are suffering. Yeah, it's the cost, the price tag of those headsets, of those glasses is very high. And I cannot wait for a Magic Leap. I cannot wait for also Apple, we know, is working very actively in AR, and what they're doing is extremely exciting. So it's going to take a few years, I think, for AR. And then there is something even more exciting, which is augmented virtual reality. Yeah, we create new things we put words together. So augmented virtual reality is when you use your environment, let's say this table, and you will project everything in virtual. So it's augmented reality, but mapping texture from the virtual world onto the real world, which is also, it will be very interesting to see for the industry, especially architecture, etc.
You're a very rare individual creatively in our world. You are an artist who loves to learn and utilize technology to tell your stories. So congratulations for being a leader. We're all following behind you with great interest to watch what you're doing.
Thank you.
And please come back and tell us more about what you're working on.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you.
The Close-Up is produced by the Advanced Imaging and VR Societies in Hollywood and is powered by Barcode.